Hey everyone, I'm Asha Rangappa, and I am doing my first Ask Asha legal question and answer. So I asked my subscribers on my Substack if they had any burning legal questions, and I got a lot of them. But I'm going to answer Daniel's question, and he asks, will Congress have any chance or appetite of limiting Trump's march to war against Iran? Now, it looks like there is some appetite. Whether there's a chance, it's a little bit of an uphill battle. Now, one of the things that I try to make sure that my students in my national security law class recognize is that there's a difference between law and policy. Whatever you think about the policy of getting involved in a conflict with Iran, whether we should, whether we shouldn't, is very separate from the legal framework. And the legal framework is both quite simple and it's a little complicated. So the Constitution basically divides war making between Congress and the president. Under Article 1 of the Constitution, Congress declares war. Under Article 2 of the Constitution, the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Pretty simple, right? Well, we haven't really declared a war since World War II. What Congress does more often is it authorizes limited hostilities. This is sort of what we saw, not sort of what we saw, it is what we saw after 9/11 with the 2001 authorization for the use of military force. And that authorization, which is still in effect and quite expansive, still lays out kind of the specific things that the president is authorized to do and the targets that he is allowed to use them against. Outside of that, the courts have recognized a defensive war power under Article 2 of the Constitution. Now, you can go and look at the words. It's not there. This is known as sort of an inherent power that if the country is attacked, that the president can take steps to respond to that attack. In other words, he doesn't have to sit around and wait for Congress to take action. And this goes back to a case called the Prize cases during the Civil War when Lincoln was instituting a naval blockade against the South. So we have those kind of parameters. Now, you won't be shocked to know that the executive branch takes an even more expansive view. The executive branch believes that it can use military force when it's in the nation's interest, as long as it doesn't meet the constitutional threshold of going to war. And I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of what would meet that. Like many legal concepts, it's sort of like a little cloudy on exactly what would need to meet that. But you can see that there's some tension here. And I don't think you need to go, too far back in history to see that the president has often engaged in unilateral military action. And in fact, this was sort of becoming a practice, and Congress was sort of losing its role in this whole constitutional scheme. And so in 1973, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution. And this was intended to sort of get back to striking this balance. And this is coming, after the U.S. has been involved in this long drawn out war in Vietnam. And, Congress wants to create more of a framework for for having a say in these kinds of things. So the War Powers Resolution lays out a few things. First, it says that the commander-in-chief authority can be exercised under those three situations that I said before: declaration of war, congressional authorization, or when the United States has been attacked. Second, it requires the president to consult with Congress before engaging in military action. Third, after the president introduces armed forces into hostilities, the president is required to report to Congress. And finally, this is the thing that most people kind of know about the War Powers Resolution. If the president does introduce the armed forces into hostilities, then there is a 60-day clock. He has to terminate the use of the military actions within 60 days, unless Congress gives authorization to continue past that. Once again, this sounds simple. It really isn't. A lot of these concepts in the War Powers Resolution aren't really defined. For example, consulting, what does that mean? There have been attempts by members of Congress to clarify, is it like, for example, does it mean that Trump just picks up the phone and calls Ted Cruz? Does he have to do something more? Similarly, that word hostilities has been interpreted very differently by the executive branch, and that hostilities is the trigger for the 60-day clock. And the 60-day clock itself, when this War Powers Resolution came before President Nixon, he believed that was just unconstitutional. He actually vetoed it, and Congress was able to pass the War Powers Resolution over that veto. So there are a few, I think there's some bipartisan bills in place to basically try to prevent Trump from engaging in military force with Iran or engaging in a conflict, because it doesn't meet those three bases that I mentioned before. Congress hasn't obviously declared war against Iran. It hasn't congressionally authorized this. The 2001 AUMF definitely does not cover any kind of action against Iran. And we're not being attacked. But the problem here is that even if Congress passes a resolution to prevent the introduction of military forces or the use of them, that is subject to a veto, and there would need to be enough votes to override that veto. In fact, in 2018, Congress did pass a resolution to prevent U.S. involvement in Yemen, and Trump vetoed that. So it's kind of like the situation with national emergencies, where Congress has the power after the president declares a national emergency to stop it, but it just becomes hard once that ball has gotten rolling. Now, Congress sort of has another trump card, if you will, which is their appropriations power. Congress has the power of the purse, and they can decide how that money is spent. And that is, in many ways, a more powerful check about whether they can gather, again, enough support to withhold funding for Trump to be able to do what he wants remains to be seen. So you can see that this is sort of a tough balance, and this is where we kind of are in a lot, and you're probably noticing in a lot of different arenas where it's really hard to rein in an executive branch, particularly when it comes to the use of military, because at the end of the day, he does have control. But that's not to say that it necessarily comports with the law. I hope that this has been helpful, and I'll be back with another legal explainer at some point. Please check out my Substack. It's the Freedom Academy with Asha Rangappa. I will solicit more questions on the chat, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.